Hi, and welcome back to Pause, Rewind, Play, where we're talking about all types of TV technology. And today, actually, we're going to be talking about the evolution of cloud production. So challenges, futures, innovation that's occurring within the space. And I am incredibly lucky to have with me my guest today, Stephen Tallamy. How are you doing, Stephen?
Very well. How are you?
I am not bad. Before we jump into this topic, of which I know you are a seasoned expert, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself, what it is that you've been doing? Yeah, let us know.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I've been working in media technology for around 20 years, spanning everything from the distribution of media, so the broadcast side of it, and technologies that drive that, and more recently focused on the production of media, so actually spanning the whole sort of content life cycle of technology. Also enjoy, being a creative myself, so making videos, making music and so on as well. So I sort of live and breathe it as much as I create technology for it.
And I think we're going to get into a bit of that creative side in our next episode, but we'll save that one back for now.
Absolutely.
It's fantastic. And it's fair to say, we've worked a bit together before in the past as well. So I think this is going to be a really, really good conversation. And so, as I said, the topic for today really is the evolution of cloud production. I think a good place to start is with what it is. So in terms of looking at a definition, I think we could look at the significance, within media and entertainment, which has been growing and is, I would say, now a kind of a centerpiece of the whole distribution chain. But cloud production as a term stretches across so many things, right? You can look at it through a number of different lenses, whether you're thinking about live sports or VOD or production of ads, whether you're thinking about physical versus virtual, control plane versus data plane. There's lots of different lenses we could choose to look at it through. But if you were, articulating this topic to someone, where would you start, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it really does. It really does. And I think it's also a bit of, a fact of how things have evolved in the industry. As we saw on the sort of delivery side, I think probably mostly delivery went before production. Right. Yeah. Generally, because people wanted to watch on iPhones and iPads and all of these kind of things. And so that delivery infrastructure was there or started to be there a lot earlier than maybe the production technologies. And so it then drives from there. Like, okay, well, if you've got a live stream into the cloud, well, maybe you can do some production on that stream as it's going into the cloud or when it's there. So I think cloud production is kind of, as you say, it really is going to depend on some of the applications that you would see. Yep. Sometimes it might be post-production, like the video editing, doing video editing in the cloud or color grading in the cloud. Sometimes it's going to be, a live stream and you're doing your switching in the cloud, those kind of things. All of those things generally depend on networking. Right, the network to get your stuff around, as opposed to SDI or other technologies that have been around, or satellite technologies. Usually, it's now a network that is there because that is what is the bread and butter of the cloud, and then moving the material through the cloud until it's available for delivery.
Oh yeah, we can almost go kind of a kind of bottoms up way to look at it, and I think that there are so many directions we could go in. I liked the concept that you mentioned before we started shooting of control plane versus data plane. Do you want to just talk to everyone a little bit about that? Because I think that's a really good lens to look at it through.
Yeah, and this echoes again the other part of the industry. So control plane is sort of everything that's controlling what's going on with the video itself. So the signaling, when signal is going to switch. So as an example, you've got multiple cameras. The thing that actually switches between those cameras, if you're in a live production environment, will be the control part of it. And then the video itself, which is the chunkier part of it, because it's, you're dealing with very high bit rates often, that would be considered generally the data plane. And so thinking about those two separately, and certainly the way I've seen cloud production happening, often you separating those two entities and deciding which of that part you're going to put in the cloud and which not. Because again, when we talk about some of the limitations or, the technology we need to enable it, there's very different technologies that enable video processing in the cloud than control plane. Control plane, control signaling and so on, tends to convert very nicely into APIs, RESTful APIs, or event-driven frameworks, which of course is effectively what most of the clouds are built on. If you think about Amazon, AWS as an example, it's a shop, right? And then all the technology of that was driving what a shop would do, and those are very much what you would consider as controlling things, control planes. Their data plane, I guess, is the physical package you get at your home.
Yeah,
and so those two are separated in the way they work, and so that's a sort of natural way of thinking about any of the applications that you're doing. Can you control? So there's examples of applications where people can get a set of, even mobile phones now, set them up in a remote environment and have someone controlling them remotely and changing camera angles from 100%. A remote place. And that is a form of the production, because they're controlling the actual data plane, but the data plane might still be passing through a traditional means. It might be going through SDI cables and out, or being recorded to local drives and eventually getting shipped, or whatever it happens. So it's good to think about those two separate things, because the control plane fits a little bit more naturally with the sort of origins of where cloud has been.
Sure. And that's actually a great point, or we'll segue into where you're producing this, these massive files, these video files, then that hybridity between control and data plane, if you have your control in the cloud, maybe in your data plane generating all of this video, that storage could, as you mentioned, could be localized. And there's absolutely no reason why it couldn't and shouldn't be.
Yes.
And maybe there's a kind of loop around to a cloud backup at some later point. And I know when you were giving me some thoughts before we were talking, you were saying, well, the early adoption of the cloud is also for things like storage anyway, so right. Backups, if you like, rather than trying to pipe video live into or out of the cloud, you could just do that as an offline backup later on.
Yeah, it's quite an easy entry point on the data plane side, because most businesses, they need backups, right? They need to have it, and they'll obviously often have physical backups, Yep. Take 2 copies, stick it on 2 different drives of some form, or 2 different storage systems, and then usually have an offsite backup. And that offsite backup is often not expected to be easily accessible. It's more of a sort of real fail-safe. So that offsite, as opposed to having one, another site that you're sending something to, or taking them home or putting them, you just stick it into the cloud, and that's kind of a natural thing. And your response time is less, concerned. You're not trying to grab it very quickly from the cloud or put it into the cloud very quickly, but you know that it's there and it's in safe hands. And of course, the availability of that storage is very, very high when it gets into the cloud, better probably than sticking it in a safe in your home, because it is still available. You can still get access to what you want. And so again, that's another example where if you split out and think about different parts of the data plane, what also you tend to find is that a proxy becomes a really important part of the data plane. So it's all very well sending the metadata or the data about it, who is the presenters, all that kind of information, when was it shot, time codes and stuff. But if you can't see it at all, it's very difficult to work with. Was that the episode of the podcast we were talking about? I can't tell from the control plane. Yeah. So being able to see some version, a proxy version, a transcoded version,
and being able to work on that.
And work on that. And so that can go into the cloud, right? And that can go quite quickly, because a lot of cameras will generate both at the same time, right? They'll create a high resolution copy that is going to be a slower, to move around, but it's the one that
pristine,
you want, pristine. That's going to be, you're going to apply your LUTs to and all these nice things, and then they often can now generate that proxy, which is a H.264 based or H.265 based proxy, which is basically how, again, coming back to where the adoption of cloud was first on the delivery side. Those are the formats that delivery is dealing with, and so the cloud's processing is much more tuned to that, because the bit rates are lower, and whilst there's still compression involved, which involves compute, they're quite low cost to store, to manage, and so on. And so that gives people an ability to still work as if they were really dealing with the real video, but it's a sort of a something they can get started with. They can start identifying it and then running it through AI, running it through other tools.
So then when you flip on its head and you move to the much more recent domain where you have live OTT streams at scale, at volume. Actually, the change there has become that with those sorts of services, you may have things like real-time graphics being added, live clipping, real-time VFX of some form or another being added, and those that may be happening via some sort of cloud tooling. Maybe via a distributed edit team or what have you. And I think it's really fascinating. So the importance of that for the industry is quite a thing we should get onto as well. So, all of the things we've talked about give you a degree of flexibility, give you a degree of scalability, potentially cost efficiency as well. These are the things that businesses that operate in this domain and most domains care about a lot.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, that flexibility, particularly if you're thinking event-driven types of stuff or things where, an investment in all of that infrastructure in the physical sense can be very expensive. Now, obviously, you can go to rental companies and rent equipment and so on, but sometimes it's just the turnaround and the efficiency that you'll get, and sometimes just the accessibility. If you've seen some of the more recent news situations where, they were covering a riot somewhere. Well, it's not really safe to send a big crew there, but if you can send someone with a discrete iPhone that can be, part of your production and you can be capturing from it and sending it into a cloud environment, and then someone can be working on it and editing it or dealing with or streaming it live. It allows you, again, that ability to take advantage of that kind of flexibility that you want. We had some customers I've worked with who they were in the education domain, and they would run a course on some of the latest and greatest Media Composer or from Avid or from Adobe Premiere, and they could just spin up a whole classroom of editing environments anywhere they wanted to. So they could just land in a even a hotel, invite people in, and they could
super flexible.
They could just do that, and then they tear it all back down again, which in an educational sense is quite good, because usually you actually do want that big reset. Like, you've done the course, you've made a load of media, then you just want to wipe it all. Well, that can take a long time to clear it out, to get rid of it.
In the
very traditional one. Whereas then the cloud, you just destroy it all and then just start again, and you can start back from a clean template where everyone's starting from the same point. And that allowed delivery of education to people that they wouldn't have been able to do, because they would have had to ship in and haul in loads of equipment, and they could just bring in
the traditional way. And in a sense also, it as much as it offers flexibility, it also in some senses lowers the barrier to entry as well. That drag all that you would have had in terms of, I need to buy all of this kit, or I need to stage it in this way, or I need to have all this hardware and software. Actually now the ability to do that, it can be purchased in a bit by bit fashion, and as you say, can be spun up very, very quickly. So that barrier to entry for businesses that want to get into that space, you don't have to be necessarily a scale player in any of those domains. You can get in much more easily. Yeah, and
I mean, that's particularly interesting where we've seen a lot of cloud adoption on the sort of editorial side, so cloud editing and so on, was actually quite a lot in the enterprise for that very reason, because a lot of enterprises have moved most of their stuff to the cloud. And some of our customers that were enterprise customers, they would have one thing left in the rack, which would be some very bespoke media asset management and storage system or something like that. And then they'd have these weird connections to it. And it was all a bit difficult for the IT teams to manage. Well, they could just say, well, turn all that off, get rid of that. You don't not got people in the office anyhow. Make it available in the cloud, and you can have that whole same sort of studio experience, but it's all managed in the cloud and accessible from wherever anyone is.
Hello. I hope you're enjoying the conversation in today's episode. I just wanted to take a moment to say a huge thank you to Spicy Mango, who are our Series 1 sponsor. If you're looking to build global scale media and digital publishing platforms, Spicy Mango bring that serious expertise. They dig deep, they look at your business goals, and they ensure technology actually does what it should do in order to drive growth and remain cost effective. You can get in touch with them at spicymango.co.uk. And with that, let's get back to the episode. Let's talk a bit about challenges that occur and some of the hurdles that can exist. Again, in the notes, I think that you provided me before we started talking, you talked a little bit about the challenges or the contradiction maybe between high transactional throughput versus high bandwidth. We touched a little bit on that before. From a security perspective, I think there are considerations there as well. What are your views on the success in overcoming these challenges, maybe perhaps with that hybrid model that we talked about, or using other techniques? I mean, clearly there has, with all these sorts of challenges, for business to progress, they need to solve for these. Right.
I mean, there is some pretty incredible technology that's come along to help do what I just explained. Like some of these technologies that came from Teradicci, which became HP Anywhere, and other things, those types of technologies are very interesting because they are designed to deal with that variability, but they can give you a really high quality experience. If you've ever seen all those things, it's really interesting because it really does feel like the machine is in front of you and it has that same responsibility. You can click, you can view, you can play back video. And if you want to have even a higher quality of video, because in color grading, you often want an even higher quality, you can use some of the traditional delivery technologies to get that back to a second screen. So it's really quite interesting how a combination of this dedicated desktop environment, but then streaming technologies that have been battle hardened to get video into people's homes for a long time, can actually be used to augment those types of experiences.
That's really interesting. But let's say for example you go pure cloud. You've got you've got some trade-offs, or maybe call them considerations in terms of cost and control. I think from a cost perspective, you've got that potentially slightly unknown variability, or maybe it isn't actually unknown in that you're just going to spend more over time, probably. But then in terms of the control perhaps that you lose, I mean, what are your thoughts on each of those areas?
Definitely for certain businesses, they're used to fixed asset cost. If you think about a post-production house, actually those assets are a thing they can advertise. I've got 5 video suites. I've got N numbers of, mixing consoles and other physical assets that they can advertise that they've got. If those all become virtualized, that can be very difficult for them to even explain as a concept to their customers. I've got this virtual thing, but it isn't really there. And
it's tangible in some sort of way.
So it can be quite difficult from a financial perspective to kind of understand it. Of course, it's really interesting because you can provide, burst capacity. If all your suites are full, well, that's it. You just have to turn away business. Whereas you could say, well, all our suites are busy, but I can spin you up a cloud system that you can use for a short period of time. And in those environments, because they are kind of used to a rental kind of model, then the charge is easy to pass on to the customer because you know that they're going to be using it for a week and it's going to cost a certain amount. I think it's for other businesses where it's a bit less known to them and a less known quantity. They just want to go, oh, well, I've bought my CapEx purchase. I know it's there. I know how to use it. That can be a bit more of a chat. Certainly like education. Again, I've mentioned education. Some education institutions, it's very difficult because they budget for a year ahead of time and say, well, I don't quite know how much I'm going to spend. I think generally, and I think, most businesses, when they adopt cloud, they have a little bit of a discovery of like certain things being more expensive than they thought. But in the round, they generally end up saving money. Because what they don't account for is the rest of the cost of running server rooms and people to run them and all of that. And that's sort of handed over now. And because they get more productivity because it's running in the cloud and it's available anywhere. Oh, I forgot to do that last edit. Well, they can do that from home and just get on with it, whereas you'd have to wait the next day and it's all delays into it. So that's the difficulty, I think, for some businesses is to see that total cost.
And to factor in all of the like you said, the extra little wins that you get as well. They're quite hard in some respects possibly to measure.
Yes, indeed.
So let's shift gear and talk about innovations. I mean, this wouldn't be a technology podcast if one or both of us didn't say AI. So let's just get that out of the way quickly. Joking aside, I mean, I think the integration of AI tool sets into these sorts of cloud workflows has been, I think, maybe going on for some time already. B, probably layered in terms of what advances or progress or options it can offer. So, whether you were thinking about things like transcription, object and face detection has been around as a AI-powered technique for a little bit now. I really like the whole idea of, and for me it feels like more of a recent thing, but you may have a longer view on this, of the whole idea of regionalization as well.
Right.
I think that's a really interesting one. I'd seen some clips more recently where there was a degree of kind of face replace going on, but it was in service of being able to support various different languages and syncing up, the dialogue with the facial movement. So I think that's a really fascinating technique.
Yeah, as well. Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the challenges with AI in the production industry is that just the scale of it can be very large. So if you were to take a documentary, a finished documentary, let's say it's a 1 hour documentary, sending them 1 hour through AI, relatively low cost to do.
Sure.
Well, that probably was thousands of hours of footage before at very high resolution.
Yeah.
And sending all that through AI can be quite costly. And also some of the results aren't going to be necessarily as helpful because audio isn't as perfect until it gets produced. So you might not be able to get all of the dialogue that you want out of it until someone's done something. Or also, things like excitement meters or, scene cut detection. Well, those don't exist yet because that's what the editorial process is going to be about. But I think you're right. Touching on the things that are really helpful, I think we found that transcription, very, very, very helpful. Of course, tools like Adobe have brought that into an editorial experience, even just to your desktop. If you've got a good GPU, you can do it. Yep. But as soon as it's in the cloud, that transcription is super, super helpful. And coming back to those proxies, if you've got a hybrid workflow, we actually found that proxies, ironically, were a little bit better on the object detection than the high resolution because the fact that because you've downscaled the picture to some extent and you've lost some of the resolution, the important things, because these codecs are designed to keep the important things, those shine through. And so if you had a tiny, tiny bicycle in the back of your frame at 4K, then if you took the original, the AI would see it. But by the time it's gone through the codec and kind of got blurred enough, you actually only see that in front of it is the Golden Gate Bridge or whatever it is that's important. Right. And so proxies are actually quite a good technology to help with that accuracy. And so you can, again, create a hybrid workflow, keep the high resolution where it is, and just use the proxies in the cloud with AI.
And do you think other things, you talked about that example with the in the field news reporter. There are other supportive technologies, things like 5G, that are only, in terms of other innovations, going to help with that too. Because, again, I think, we're all maybe familiar with the lower quality in the field streams that various guests or reporters may have been contributing into a central newsroom. They kind of go out to this person in the field. The quality is maybe not perfect, but that has noticeably been improving, in waves up to the point now where it's really quite good.
Yes,
indeed.
I mean, someone's willing to put an iPhone footage on the BBC News, right?
Yep.
And it be the live experience because they know that the quality is going to be good enough for broadcast. And of course, broadcast quality is only getting, you're into 4K and above, so you really need that high resolution. So I think those technologies, will enable a lot more. Usually the kind of some of the challenges of adoption are just down to physical network availability, and you often get into these kind of, well, what if my network isn't available? And that's a combination of both speed and throughput, but also reliability as well. So if there are multiple channels that you can rely on, a bit like in your home, if your Wi-Fi goes off and you can switch to your 4G or something for a period and keep doing your work, similar kind of activities. You've got multiple pathways, which again you would have had in a physical sense. You wouldn't just had one cable coming out the camera, you probably have two coming out the camera, or you'd have multiple ways in case something fails. So I think as those improve, I think that's also going to enable people to adopt it in more detail. It's
really shrunk down the kit that you need. Maybe gone from like an OB van to a backpack that's got a battery. It's got, I don't know, maybe it's got some form of augmented connectivity in it, like you mentioned, some sort of bonding technique involved in there. But could be as simple as just jumping on a mobile cell and kind of pushing your footage up through that way. And I mean, it speaks interestingly then for the future, doesn't it? I mean, I think that if we kind of think about how cloud production could what it could do for us going forward, I think perhaps one area is interesting is this idea of like a fully decentralized workflow. You've got people spread across massive geographical areas doing various different tasks. Maybe they are like you said, whether it's via the process for proxy or some other, but basically all working on top of each other at the same time, and getting whatever it is that needs to be processed, and the role that things like virtualization are going to play in that. I mean, the future's bright, right? I mean, I think it's only going to become more. Yeah, I think it's that collaborative aspect of it. I mean, today, still a lot of media workflows, they are quite staged. You have to kind of capture it, and then you have to edit it, and then you have to add sound to it, and there's lots of things. And I think that can become a lot more
as you say, collaborative. It's also, as an individual, you might be great at one part of that, but you may not. I mean, I'm sure you're learning how to edit podcasts, right? That's a skill that you're having to develop. It takes a long time. But once you're good at it, so being able to collaborate with somebody else who could actually do that for you, or at least give you a first view of how an edit could come together, and then you can fine tune it yourself and collaborate together. I think that's very exciting in terms of just that spread, that spread of talent pool and accessing talent from around the world. That you can collaborate with who've got their own specialities and they bring their own thing to it.
And they're almost like you're a sidecar, and you just watch and learn as they're doing it. That's really, gosh, yes, I need to do that.
Yeah.
And in terms of the balance between creativity and technology, and I think there's like an interesting point here that technology, those tools should be in service of that creativity.
Yes.
And not, I think some folks might benefit from the press the button, one click, and you get everything done for you. But I think in order to have the art, in order to have the, that creative element to it, the technologies that we're coming up with, I mean, would you agree with the statement they should be in service of creativity and art, as opposed to just almost automating the whole thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all the tools that we've got in the toolbox are they're still there. They don't go away. Why do people go back and shoot on film?
Yeah.
Why do they do it? Because it's a tool in the toolbox. It hasn't gone away, and it has a particular way of making movies. You can't keep reshooting and reshooting and reshooting. It's a much more limited, but because of those constraints, you actually get a lot more. Creativity often it comes from constraints that are applied to something as you do something in a different way. And so I think any of these tools, the AI tools, these cloud tools, they should be they are another tool in the toolbox, but don't forget about all the other ones. And understanding how all of them work can be really helpful, because I know how film works and I know how it's going to be processed, and maybe I could have a go at trying it. Maybe I don't have a film camera and I can find someone who does it. But I think that's also part of the mix, is understanding that these are just tools towards the creativity, and it's exciting to have new ones because of the possibilities that does, but also don't, having that take over the creativity and just let the tools do the creative act. I think that's a kind of dangerous area to get into.
Yeah, I mean, maybe beneficial in some circumstances, but for the most part, maybe not so much. And just as we kind of wrap this discussion in this episode, do you have any kind of, I don't know, lasting or final thoughts? I mean, I liked when we talked before, you said about this idea of kind of early cloud adoption and the rapid path to maturity. And the bit I loved the most about it was where you said just, like with a lot of things, you should test, like if you're not cloud ready, cloud production ready, like test and learn, and get there.
Absolutely. Yeah, because there is a difference when you start using cloud technologies. A lot of, traditional production, it's quite physical, connecting cables together and connecting and building server racks and stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's quite a different skill set to sort of virtualize all that, and it will become software oriented, which is quite different. And so if you haven't really experimented with it, there will be a bit of a leap to get there. And I think there will be other people who've already done that leap, and they're off and they're disrupting and they're finding new ways of doing things more quickly. And so if you haven't even taken your first step into the cloud, I really would encourage taking it first, whether that's backing up something to the cloud and then maybe just trying processing it once it's there, do something, send it through an AI or send it through a tool, and understand the concepts there and understand the real costs of it, because again, there can be a lot of concern about variable costs, but in reality you find, well, actually there's a very cheap way of doing it. Obviously you could still make an error and it will be financially costly to you, so you get some advice on how you're approaching it. But I think it's just really important that people do adopt something, do something, because I think those businesses, the similar elsewhere where they didn't adopt a cloud, eventually got a big disruptor like a Netflix comes along or somebody else comes along and disrupts your traditional model because they've adopted cloud and they've adopted that delivery. The same can happen within the production space as well. So be ready for it and just try something out.
Well, look, I mean, it's a great discussion. Thank you so much. I mean, like the experience that you have and obviously your expertise as well, I think just made for a really, really good discussion. I mean, for everyone else that's watching, thank you so much for for getting to the end if you made it this far. Please do feel free to subscribe and drop a like if you'd like to. And like when we're talking about these, any sorts of technology, sometimes it is good to pause, rewind and play.